Welcome to the Theoretical Neuroscience Podcast. I am the host, Gaute Einvoll. I did theoretical condensed matter physics for my PhD back in the days, mostly working on the quantum mechanical behavior of semiconductors. I graduated in 1991 and moved to University of California in San Diego to pursue a postdoc in the same field. There I met a fellow Norwegian, Anders Dale, who was working on a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at the time. We became friends and ended up sharing an apartment. Anders is quite mathematically oriented, and he showed me some papers from the pioneering early studies in computational neuroscience. In particular, I remember he showed me two now classical papers of Wilson and Cowan from the early 70s. Here they suggested and explored a neural network model where the collective behavior of populations of similar neurons were described by a single dynamical variable, the average firing rate of action potentials for the neurons in the population. This simplified the mathematics a lot, making it possible to obtain insights about the dynamics of the network without resorting to heavy numerical simulations. This type of model is called a mean field model, because it in essence assumes all the neurons in the population to behave the same, so that only the average or mean behavior is modeled. Such models have been used in many branches of physics, so it has a natural appeal to people like me who have a physics education. However, many different types of mean field models for neuronal populations have been suggested over the years. Most of them can be called heuristic. Heuristic means that they have been suggested based on intuition or pragmatic assumptions. They have not been derived from first principles, using a set of well-defined approximations on the way. Thanks to work from physicists such as Boltzmann and Maxwell, we have a wonderful first principle derivation of the macroscopic gas laws in terms of variables such as temperature and pressure, starting with a microscopic description of the same gas in terms of the velocities of the individual molecules in the gas. Mean field models, also called neural mass models, are used a lot in today's computational neuroscience, for example as the fundamental building block in human whole brain models as discussed in podcast number 33, no, it's not 33, number 23, with Victor Yirsa. It would be great if these and other mean field models similarly could be derived systematically from first principles, that is, starting with microscopic properties of individual neurons. Today's guest, Tilo Schwalger, has done pioneering work along these lines. In 2017, he published a very nice paper on the topic together with Moritz Steger and Wolfram Gerstner titled Towards a Theory of Cortical Columns, from Spiking Neurons to Interacting Neural Populations of Finite Size. Here they systematically derived a new mean field theory describing populations of spiking neurons, each model as a generalized integrated fire type spiking model, the so-called GIF model. Their mean field model excellently reproduced results of the corresponding microscopic model, that is, results from direct simulation of a network of GIF neurons. Importantly, their mean field model was 100 times faster to run on a computer compared to doing such direct simulations. Their new mean field model also describes the dynamics of populations of a modest number of neurons, that is, some hundreds of neurons. In many cases of practical interest, for example, populations of neurons in the sensory cortex of rodent, this is a typical number of neurons. This modest neuron number induces fluctuations in the population dynamics, so-called finite size fluctuations, and mesoscopic mean field models of the type Tilo derived are needed to account for them. In traditional macroscopic mean field models, an infinite number of neurons is theoretically assumed, and effects of finite size fluctuations is not accounted for. In the podcast, we first talk about stochastic neuron models, that is, neuron models explicitly involving random numbers. Tilo studied this in his early days and brought this skill into his later work on modeling population dynamics. Then we talk about mean field models in general, their history, and why they have been so useful. Then we move on to limitations of the traditional mean field models, before we dive into Tilo's own model from 2017 and later work building on it. If you want to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/theoretical neuroscience podcast and choose a membership of your liking. For example, at the cost of $1 per month. As a member, you will get access to a video version of the podcast recordings, as well as transcripts of each episode. And note that there is a 7-day free trial period when you sign up. I also have a YouTube channel called Theoretical Neuroscience Podcast, where you can also watch the videos. I really appreciate all of you who are already Patreon supporters. Thanks a lot. I will be most grateful if more join in to help me fund the production of the podcast, even if you're not too interested in looking at the videos. But I also appreciate all the other listeners and hope that all of you can help spread the word about the podcast to other people in the community on social media or otherwise. Okay, here is Tilo. Yes, so welcome to the Theoretical Neuroscience Podcast, Tilo Schwalger.
Hi, Gaute. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's so this podcast is going to be about sort of like ways to model efficiently model population activities mainly. But what's your background? You've been working with sort of stochastic processes and neural networks for a long time, right? You took your PhD on that with Benjamin Lintner.
Yeah, that's right. So I worked on stochastic neuron models, so single neurons, already starting from my diploma in theoretical physics. So using the tools of stochastic processes developed in statistical physics, and then also during my PhD, I worked on stochastic neural models whose spike trains are described by non-renewal processes. So
Okay,
those
so
spike
yeah,
trains
maybe
that we
just start there. So what's what's a renewal process, and what is a non-renewal process?
right. So the simplest process to model stochastic spiking is a Poisson process, and this process does not account for the refractoriness of neurons.
So what?
And
Maybe start. What is a Poisson process?
the Poisson process is a point process. That means it describes events or spikes in time. And in a Poisson process, these events are completely independent. So the spiking of neurons are assumed to be completely independent.
So,
That's the simplest stochastic model for
because
stochastic spiking neuron.
so that's just a statistical model, right? It's not a model.
Yes,
So that's
that's
like a
right.
statistical representation of the spiking.
Right. So there is more abstract description of spike trains. You can call it statistical model. Um, that are Poisson process, renewal processes, and Hawkes processes, and so on. That do not have an underlying dynamics that transfer neural input into spiking output. But the standard or many of the real neuron models, they belong to a certain class of point processes. And there are simple neuron models that can be modeled by an inhomogeneous Poisson process. And the next more
An inhomogeneous Poisson process, that's when the rate varies over the time.
exactly.
But
So there is a time-dependent firing rate, and spikes are drawn with a probability that corresponds to this time-dependent firing rate. So meaning that a spike occurs in a small time step delta t with a probability of rate times delta t. And in each time step, a spike is drawn independently from the previous spikes. And this does not account for some history of spike history that we have in real neurons. So in real neurons, we have this refractoriness, for example. That means that immediately after a spike, the probability to have another spike is very small. And this is incompatible with a Poisson process. So the next interesting class of point processes are renewal processes, and they are given by the interspike interval densities, so the distribution of the times between two spikes. So with providing this density, one can, for example, account for a refractory period or some lower probability to fire immediately after a spike. And the intervals in a sequence of a spike train, they are assumed independent in a renewal process. And this comes from renewal theory that if a machine breaks, the next time or the next waiting time for the new machine to break will be independent of the time the previous machine survived, basically. So this
so
there
okay, so
is
it's not it can depend. So in terms of spikes, means that the next spike does not depend on the time of the previous spike, or does it depend on the time of the previous spike?
it depends on the previous spike, but not on the spikes before the previous spikes.
Okay.
And this is the case in very standard neuron models, like the leaky integrated fire model driven by a white noise, which is a very common neuron model in computational neuroscience. And there, in these integrated fire neurons, the voltage is reset after a spike to a reset potential, and this erases all memory of the past. This means that the next interspike interval will be completely independent of the previous ones. Therefore, this model is or belongs to the class of renewal models.
Exactly. Okay. So that's a renewal process, and so then but you also worked, you said, during your PhD on non-renewal processes, right? Is that what you said?
Exactly. So
that's even harder.
That's much harder. Yeah. Because for renewal processes, we can still analytically compute a lot of statistics, like the power spectrum, firing rates, and other statistics. But for the non-renewal process, not. So non-renewal process is, as the word says, a spike train that is not renewal. So the interspike intervals are not independent, and that happens, for example, if neurons have adaptation, or if the input has some temporal correlations. And both mechanisms, they lead to correlations between interspike intervals and a history dependence. And for example, for the case of adaptation, adaptation is an important mechanism in neurons that is found for many cell types, and it is associated with a slower process, slower current that that depends on the activity in the past. So it remembers or it accumulates with each spike, but slowly forgets. And this additional variable or process introduces some memory that extends to a history beyond the last spike. But and this leads to correlations between interspike intervals. I developed theories for the correlations between interspike intervals, which would be zero for renewal process, but they are non-zero for non-renewal process. They can be measured in experiments. One can learn from the correlation something about the mechanisms. For example, the source of noise in certain sensory cells. yeah, so that's
So
adaptation, and then there is this other mechanism, the temporal correlated input.
mm.
I can also talk
So
about.
no. I was just sort of going to, because this, because we are both trained as physicists, but
Yes.
I mean, you were trained, or at least you focused towards the end on more of this, like this whole, this like stochastic systems and this whole way of describing stochastic differential equations and and so on. And then I think after you worked on this, and then during your PhD with Benjamin Lindner, and then you'd had some shorter postdocs in Japan and US, right before you became started working as a postdoc in Wolfram Gerstner's laboratory, right? And then at EPFL, and then you sort of, I guess that's when you sort of started focusing on like applying these sort of like more, maybe it's like these tools from this branch of physics to a very specific neural problem, how to describe sort of a populations of spiking neurons, right?
Yes.
Mm.
Right. So I really went from the single neuron level
Mm.
during my PhD to networks when I started my postdoc in at EPFL in Lausanne. And yeah, so I think we have a quite good understanding of single neurons and how to model them, for example, in terms of simplified integrate and fire neurons, but
Mm.
how to describe populations of neurons is um, yeah, it's more difficult,
Mm.
and I tackled a particular problem, namely the problem of finite size populations
Mm.
of
Yeah, we're
stochastic.
coming to that, but I just want to like make the bigger picture first, because I mean, what you've been working on, I guess, also now the overall like theme is sort of, which I guess you also have worked on since I think 2018. You've been like an assistant professor in Berlin, working on also this overall theme of how to bridge gap between the micro world and
Yes.
the macro world in brain models. And so, what is, in the context of brain models, what is micro?
Yes. So I think in computation neuroscience, the microscopic description is the level of the individual spiking neurons. That means that that the resolution with which one is simulating, let's say, some neural system, like say a network, is really single neurons. So one would need to simulate each neuron in a large network. Yeah, and that would be microscopic from our understanding, because the spikes are the main signals in the brain, and
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
this this would capture more or less
Mm.
the single particles of the
Yeah,
microscopic description.
and I guess the good thing is that, at least compared to other branches of computational neuroscience, we are quite good at modeling the dynamics, the spike generation of
Yes,
single neurons, right? That's where we have like a solid foothold, I guess, starting
yes,
in with the work of Hodgkin and Huxley, maybe, and then of course, which has been
exactly. Yeah.
developed in all kinds of. Okay, so then why can't you just sort of, if you want to study networks, right, with thousands or millions of these, why can't you just hook them up on a computer and simulate them using these well-established microscopic models?
Yes, one can do that, but uh, there are some problems. So first of all, it's computationally expensive. So there are some limitations if you want to go really large scale. But on the other, maybe even more important aspect is that uh, there will be new emergent phenomena that we cannot understand by looking at this very complex high-dimensional system. Right. So if you have
So how do you the word high dimension? We just make sure that everyone is with us on that. So high dimension mean that it's many differential equations
yes,
connected.
yes,
That's what it's.
yes.
Yeah.
So each neuron has at least one differential equation, and the interaction between neurons is by spikes. So this leads to very complex dynamics. And I think there's no way to just looking at this, at these thousands of equations to get some understanding what happens, whether there will be some oscillation or not. So we need some reduction.
I guess in principle you could look at them as just neural data and then do data analysis and right. In case if you had like this 1 million spike trains and were able to deal with them in your
Yes.
computer, you could just do. I mean, you could do
Yes,
data analysis, right?
but I think you could not predict the 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 dynamics, the collective dynamics of all these neurons by just looking at the equations, at these many
No.
equations, and one would not get a good mechanistic understanding of why there are, let's say, oscillations or certain
No, I
quality
certainly
stable.
agree. I'm just a devil's advocate here. I certainly agree with
Also,
you.
also another reason is that we do not know all the microscopic parameters. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and then the question is, yeah, whether it's really so completely true, the microscopic model. Yeah.
I think this is an important point because before I entered the sort of neuroscience, I did like condensed matter physics. So and then of course if you then you can in principle you can solve like get the properties of materials by hooking up many atoms, putting them in lattices, and then solve the equations for them. But there you know all the parameters because it's like Planck's constant and it's like
Yes.
the mass and right. But
Yeah.
this is a principally different thing. Here it's so you could say in that case the models were more realistic, but in neuroscience where you don't know the model parameters, it's sort of it's dangerous to say that more detailed means more realistic. That's not clear.
Right. Right. Especially connectivity. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and also yeah, that's true. So anyway, but here, so then this sort of sets the stage that we need some models for a way to deal with these systems with many neurons. And then the buzzword is sort of mean field models. So what is the idea of mean field models? This is of course something that was used a lot in physics
yes.
to understand, for example, magnetic systems and so in physics. So there's statistical mechanics, mean field models are really important. So what is the idea of mean field models in, when it comes to like neuronal dynamics?
Yeah. So that is a huge reduction of complexity coming from statistical physics by basically assuming that or considering one neuron that sits in kind of a mean field. So the interactions between 10,000s of neurons are just taken as kind of a mean force that acts on a neuron. And so a single neuron in this network sees just the average activity, so the mean. And then this becomes almost a single neuron problem, a neuron that gets the mean activity. But then one has to close the loop and self-consistently determine the mean, because the output of the neuron should be consistent with the mean input it receives.
Yeah.
And there are various yeah, extension. So actually, in computation in neuroscience, it's not only the mean that one considers, but also the fluctuations that of the synaptic input that a neuron sees. But in the end, the idea is to close the system in the first or second moment, and but this is a much simpler problem that one can often analytically treat, and also leads to much simpler dynamics. So one can come up with simpler models only that only describe the evolution of the moments, the temporal evolution of the moments.
Moments mean like the variance and the whatever, so called kurtosis,
Yes, so
whatever is higher order.
the firing rate mainly, or the mean membrane potential, but then one can also look at second moments. So usually one is truncating.
So,
This.
and in the context of network dynamics, what you try to make mean field models for is the firing rates, right? Firing
Yes.
rates of neurons, which we think of that the neurons has some kind of some firing rate, and as you said, you don't the mean field model. I mean, like the simplest version only models sort of like the average firing rate, the mean.
Yes.
But this you also use the word mean field model when it's like variability and fluctuations are included in like as a second equation, for example, right? So that's just we call that mean field also, even though it's like it's not strictly speaking mean only.
Right. So there's also extensions. So that are called dynamical mean field theory that take into account dynamics and fluctuations. So this also exists outside, or actually was invented also outside neuroscience, of course.
So because then so the firing rates. I mean, like when you want to go to these go beyond like the spiking models and maybe then like mean field models for brain activity, populations of activity. It's about getting good mean field models for the firing rates. But how do you define a firing rate? I guess you can both have single neuron firing rates and population firing rates. So what is single neuron firing rates?
Yeah, so this would be the average number of spikes per unit time. So one can define that either on some time window, so that one just looks at the number of spikes in 100 milliseconds time windows. That would be an estimate of the firing rate. So more from a theoretical point of view, it would be the mean spike train. So if one has many trials of a single neuron, or one has
maybe that if like in the context of maybe showing some stimulus or something visual.
Yeah, so
stimulus.
the neuron receives a time-dependent stimulus, and one can repeat the experiment many times. One gets an ensemble of spike trains, a statistical ensemble, and then one can look at the ensemble average of these spike trains, and this is the instantaneous firing rate.
Huh.
And yeah,
So that's the single neuron firing rate, and then it's the population firing rate.
right. So population firing rate would be the population average of the spike trains.
Yeah. So, but so this is also called a neural mass model, right? That's sort of is that sort of the
Right.
also
so
used for that? Yeah.
Yeah, so one way to describe a network is to assume that there are some homogeneous populations that can be described by the population activity, so by the summed activity, meaning the number of spikes in some small time step delta t divided by delta t. And yeah, one could consider this as a mass, maybe. So it's, especially if there are many population, then one has these interacting masses, let's say.
So a population then is, so then you think of it as sort of like a group of neurons that sort of has the same, roughly the same properties, respond similarly
Exactly.
to the inputs, similar connection patterns, and
Yes. Exactly.
yeah.
So that's yeah, the classical view that there are kind of groups of neurons that have similar properties, also similar tuning properties, like cortical columns, and that one, yeah, can describe them as a homogeneous population. And then the idea is that that one assumes that to be infinitely large, and then the population or the average, or the average of the spike trains really becomes for n to infinity a continuous rate variable.
Yeah. So exactly. So, and I guess so. Then everybody. I mean, in the field, when you talk about the neuron, you maybe say it's like layer 4 pyramidal cell in a mouse visual cortex. So everybody thinks about population, right? In
Right.
some sense, that there are,
Exactly. Yes. If you
yeah.
talk
So this
about this, then you have
becomes,
implicitly the
yeah,
uh, imagination that there's a population.
yeah, exactly. So if not, you would just have to say a neuron in the brain, right? That
Right.
would be
Yeah.
in a certain area, maybe, but still. So, okay. So then, what does this firing rate models has sort of like obviously some history, and I think one of the first papers I read in when I switched, before I switched to neuroscience, but I got to get me interested, or that got me interested, was this work by Wilson and Cowan from like 72 and 73, I guess, where they made a rather sort of rather simple firing rate model. I think also Amari, another this Japanese neuroscientist, also had like similar ideas at the same time. So, but what does this simplest firing rate model really look like mathematically?
Yeah. So that's right. So Amari and Wilson Cowan, they developed these models that are described by just first order differential equations for a given population, let's say the excitatory population, um, that describes the firing rate of the population, so the mean firing rate of the population, or some synaptic variable. So there are two different versions of the firing rate model. And they have a dynamics described by a differential equation, and the steady state, or the steady state firing rate is can be taken as, let's say, the Fi curve of the neurons. So one can make the stationary properties correct, but the relaxation towards the steady state is taken just by first order kinetics with some time constant tau.
So what's just remind us, what is the Fi curve of a neuron?
So this is the steady state firing rate as a function of the input current. So it's also called a transfer function because it transfers input into output firing rate. It's usually some sigmoidal shaped function. The more input the neuron gets, the higher the firing rate, but there is some saturation usually.
So the assumption, as just just to reiterate what you said, I mean it's the models for the mean population firing rate, and assume that it's all neurons in the populations are essentially the same,
Yes.
and it neglects effects of fluctuations, which is another way to say that you can think of this as like the number of neurons in the population going to infinity,
Yes.
which is of course a key assumption that we're coming back to. But
Maybe I forgot to say in this Wilson Cowan model, there's also input that depends itself on the population firing rate. So it's really a closed dynamics in the rate. So there's this Fi curve or transfer function of the input current that depends in turn on the population firing rate.
So I mean Wilson Cowan, like the Amari models, and that, I mean, it's been used a lot, right? I mean, like Hopfield sort of took advantage of this idea,
Yes.
and many people. So would you say that they have been well, how successful have they been?
Yeah, I think they have been extremely successful. Yeah, because they are much simpler and mathematically tractable. So I think most of our many of the most successful models in computational neuroscience are firing rate models. For example, we think of visual processing. Um, there are ring models that describe some contrast enhancement by basically a firing rate model. It's a version of the firing rate model called neural field model. Or recurrent neural networks that have been used for describing
Because
motor commands.
neural field models have this spatial dimension in it,
Right.
right?
So exactly. So if you think of neural mass model, it's just a rate of time t, but a field model it would be a rate of location x and time t. Yeah, that's right. But mathematically, the important thing is that we deal with continuous variables and not with discrete spikes. And yeah, for their models for decision making, like perceptual decision making, that are based on firing rates, and one can really understand this. Let's say simple bistable perception experiments by two-dimensional firing rate models that have two attractors, where the one attractor corresponds to one perception and the other attractor to another perception. And this is very intuitive and conceptually nice. Also, the Hopfield models for associative memories. It's very intuitive and suggestive. It's
So bistable perception, that's when you sort of can see an image as two different things, like a
exactly
vase, or like two facing faces, or two faces looking at each other's, like so you can switch what you perceive is one of the two, but not both at the same time, right? So
right.
so, but I mean, just this is more like a philosophical point, almost, I guess, is, but I mean, successful in the sense that it's been used a lot is doesn't mean that it's really close to biology, or that it's and maybe you could have like, maybe it's just like they're flexible enough to fit many things without really reflecting too much of biological reality.
I mean, what is a good model, right? It's so a simple model can be actually a better model
That's true.
if it can explain the question at hand.
Yeah.
And also the firing rate models, they can be true, especially if one looks at at on longer time scales, not the fast transients that probably, or some synchronization effects that are not captured by these firing rates. But I think the basic mechanisms are often captured in these computational models, or I mean, models that explain some neural computation. Yeah? Be it working memory, associative memory, or decision making, or motor commands, and all this. These things. So maybe this already explains the main mechanisms that are going on. But then one needs to check whether this is also true with the more realistic spiking dynamics. Whether this can still be implemented with the neurons that we have in the brain that produce spikes and not rates.
So you mentioned already a little bit about sort of what these, at least these old style traditional firing rate models cannot explain. And one thing is synchronization, that sometimes actually neurons in a population are not firing sort of independently of each other in a way. They are synchronizing. That's one thing it's struggling with. And also responses to rapidly varying stimuli. So, for example, I think that's sort of like the easiest example. If you have a population that is sort of relaxed, and then it's getting this rapid, so like a flash of a visual stimuli, for example, then in reality you can get these oscillatory population firing rates, but that's not something that is easily captured by the simplest models, right?
Exactly. So a first order firing rate model, so that has just a relaxation towards a steady state, like exponential relaxation. It cannot produce oscillations. So for oscillation, you need at least two variables, like we know from the harmonic oscillator in physics, which is described by a two-dimensional system of first order equations. So these simple firing rate models cannot describe oscillations that one sees on a short time scale. Let's say if one simulates a population of integrated fire neurons, you would nicely see the oscillations, but the firing rate model cannot capture it.
But then you can sort of, I guess, drive. I mean, you can something called this population density approach. That's something that can deal with this also with rapidly varying stimuli, right?
Right.
What's the idea here?
Yeah. So the correct way to describe a homogeneous population of let's say integrate and fire neurons that are noisy would be to look at the distribution of the state variable, let's say the membrane potential of the neuron at a given time. So that would uniquely define the current state of a large population of integrate and fire neurons. And then instead of tracing the membrane potentials of each single neuron, one would track the evolution of this distribution, of this probability density of the membrane potential. And from that distribution, one can extract the population activity at each moment in time.
But then, of course, this then this is essentially, then it's not a one-dimensional. It's like a first-order differential equation anymore.
Yes,
Then it's a
exactly.
partial differential equation, so you end up with mathematically a much more complicated thing.
Exactly. So that would be formally an infinite dimensional dynamics
Mm.
um, that is produced by this partial differential equations. Because these um, population density equations, they are usually partial differential equations, and they correspond to an infinite dimensional system of ODEs, of ordinary differential equations. And this can give very rich dynamics. For example, it can it can nicely capture the oscillations in the if you
Mm.
get a rapid change in the input to a population.
And this is this Fokker-Planck equation, and just from the
Ex-
naming, we've heard that this has been used before, right? That's
yes, exactly. So so here one has to distinguish different noise models for the single neurons. There is a noise model called diffusive noise, where the neurons receive noise in the input, like a Gaussian white noise, for example, that can mimic a Poisson shot noise, for example, in the diffusion approximation, and then one gets stochastic differential equations, and one knows from the theory of stochastic processes that there is a corresponding equation for the probability density called Fokker-Planck equation. And now the probability density is almost the same, or is the same as the population density, is just a different viewpoint. So instead of single neuron, one looks at uh, one looks at many neurons.
mm. Now this what so you say noisy neurons, but this is always something that has confused me a little bit. What is, I mean, what you're trying to model is like well, it could be well, like you do later, you use this integrated fire spiking neurons, and which are then a population of those which are connected. So they are, of course, very complicated, but they are deterministic, right? I meaning there's no separate noise in there. So when you start then talking about noisy neurons, what do you really mean?
Yeah. So yeah, there is different sources of noise usually. So it makes sense to model neurons as stochastic processes, simply because the
Mm.
spikes are already very irregular and apparently probabilistic. And then there's a lot of has been a lot of research on where does the variability come from. So there is, of course, neuron intrinsic noise, like the opening and closing of the ion channels.
Mm.
Um, but there's also synaptic input that comes, let's say, from background populations or from neurons in the background that is not explicitly modeled in the local network. And often this is modeled just as some Poisson processes that impinge on on each neuron.
No, so I
And
understand that, but I sort of thinking, so even if there's, I certainly know there's a lot of noise sources in the real biology, right? And we
yes,
certainly don't know what they are, and so we might just have to model them as noisy processes. But in this model world, we also, the deterministic integrated fire networks, we also, in some sense, introduce noise when we want to simplify the and make it into population description. It's more like a mathematical trick almost, or it's like an assumption, right? That it's that you add noise which is not really there to begin. It's not noise at the microscopic level in the model.
uh, not sure I understand. So the so why does one start with with stochastic neuron models. You mean, or
No, I think that's the point. You don't start with stochastic neural models. You start with deterministic neural models. And when you want to get a population description of it,
yes,
you start, some sense, talking about noise and various types of noise and shot noise. So in some sense, the noise
yes,
description actually simplifies it and makes
yes.
it possible.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's actually true. Yeah.
So no, it's
But also without noise, the the network can synchronize much more
yeah,
strongly. Yeah.
that's true.
So I think um, yeah. So so you would get so without noise, probably the dynamics could be much more singular and would
But
complicate the mathematics. And the noise somewhat would regularize the dynamics and
but I mean, now it's already. But if you think of the normal, like the asynchronous irregular state of that's, it looks like it has noise sources, right?
yes.
But it
Okay,
doesn't really.
so
It's
yeah,
just
okay.
chaotic thing, right? Or almost chaos or whatever.
Yes. Okay, so there's also intrinsically generated noise
Okay.
that might not be really noise, but just chaotic
Yeah.
dynamics, very complex
Yeah.
dynamics that basically looks like noise that leads to
Yeah.
power spectra that are continuous and
So you model something.
that are basically in the theory modeled as noise. Yeah, so there's this, for
Interesting.
example, there's a famous series by Sompolinsky and co-workers that have purely deterministic networks of randomly connected neurons. And in their mean field theory, basically they assume that the neuron gets a mean input, which is zero in the usually in their works, and then a Gaussian process
Price. Yeah.
that is the result of a large number of or the sum of a large number of deterministic units that are basically independent. And the network is actually chaotic, but one can, by assuming this to be a stochastic process, one can analytically compute a lot of
Yeah.
things.
It's interesting,
So
right? That you add noise to help you in your calculations, in some sense, right? Or
yes, yeah,
yeah.
that's
Well, I mean, it's just whatever works. Yeah. So okay.
I mean,
So
one can rigorously justify this. I think.
oh yeah, I'm not worried about that. I was just wondering if I misunderstood something. I think it was sort of like an interesting, almost philosophical point, right? That you sort of okay. But now we come to this. So now we say that okay, this the one limitation of this low dimensional or like simple firing rate models cannot deal with like this rapid fluctuations. And so that's one. So that could be dealt with this, for example, this population density approach. And then you have this other effect with a finite size population. And I think this is the work that was had always been that you did. And I think it was a paper published when you were in the group of Wolfgang Gessner, paper in 2017 in PLOS Computational Biology, where you really developed this very, I think, impressive and important theory for how to deal with smaller populations than like when n doesn't go to infinity. And like, because I've been interested in this, like when if you look at the populations, meaning like neurons, say in the barrel cortex of mice or rats, that can reasonably be grouped as saying that you are sort of you are in the same population, then you often end up with like 100 or 1,000 neurons and that order, right? So
right.
then, and 100 is not infinity, or not necessarily infinity, at least. So And you said that this in this paper, right? We're going into that, but first you said that this finite size effects calls finite size of the population causes what you call spiking noise in populations. So what is spiking noise in this context?
Yeah, I would call it maybe finite size noise.
Okay.
It's because the spiking at the microscopic level is noisy or stochastic.
Mhm.
Now, averaging over an infinite number of neurons would average out this spiking noise at the microscopic level. But for finite size population, there are residual fluctuations if one just takes the population average of a finite number of neurons. And yeah, so we have these fluctuations.
Due to the
When we
finite
deal
size.
with if you deal with finite size populations, which I
So it's
think
sort of
are
like
very important for modeling cortical circuits in the brain.
so this is sort of like if you throw a dice many times, you can actually get 5 6s in a row, but which would be so. And if you only throw it for 100 times, then you can get this. Wow, this has a lot of 6s, but that's if you throw it infinite amount, so infinitely many times, it will sort of vanish and come back to the.
Yeah, so there's in mathematics the law of large numbers, so that the mean or basically the arithmetic mean of these many trials of throwing a dice would then really converge to the
Exactly.
to the
Like,
mean.
and the deviation will go like 1 over the square root of the number of throws or something, right? That's
Exactly.
diffusion, essentially. So good. So, but then in your like 2017 paper, you used not the simplest integrated fire model. You used something called the generalized integrated fire model. What is that, and why did you use that, not just like the leak integrated fire model, which is the simpler ones?
Yes. So this generalized integrated fire model is a different, maybe from the standard model in two different aspects. First, it adds a more general spike history dependence, for example, to model effects like adaptation. And second, the noise process is not an input noise, but an output noise. So the spikes are drawn stochastically given the deterministic membrane potential.
So it's not
So,
a deterministic model. There's a
so this,
randomness in the when you pass the threshold, some sense.
yes, it's kind of a soft threshold.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
could think of this.
Yeah.
So in this model, or at least how we use it, there is no stochastic input at the level of the input current or the membrane potential. So of course the membrane potential integrates all the synaptic inputs and external stimuli. But then at each time one asks what is the probability to fire a spike in the next little time step, delta t. And this is given by a so-called hazard function or conditional intensity function that turns the membrane potential, the instantaneous membrane potential, in a spike probability. And then one can draw by throwing a coin and decide whether there is a spike or not. And usually, the larger the membrane potential, so the higher is the probability to the instantaneous firing probability. and one can make it really very close to a sharp threshold, so that this probability is very low below the threshold and very high above the threshold. But one can make it more soft, so one can play around with the steepness. So this gives rise to another type of stochastic neuron model. So we have the models with input noise or diffusive noise, and the models with output noise. And this has certain advantages. So this has been also, developed by or used by many people in the past. This output noise. It's also called escape noise. So this has been termed by this was a term used by Wolfram Gerstner, who has developed a lot of theory on this type of neuron models, but there were other people who used this escape noise model, like going back to
so just say a shout out for his really fantastic book, Neuronal Dynamics, which we have used in our group too. It's really if you want to learn about spiking neural models and also how it links to whatever firing rate models and population density and everything, that's really an excellent source.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah, no,
on this. We of course also use this, and
yeah.
I have my personal signed copy from Wolfram.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
So, but because this generalized integrated and fired model, so that they are something that can be extracted for individual neurons in experiments, right? So I think
Yes.
there's like they extracted a lot of these, for example, at the Allen Institute, didn't they?
Yes. So the nice thing is that this model can be efficiently fitted to neuronal electrical recordings of the neuronal memory potential and the spikes. And this formal, so one can, so this model is equivalent to a so-called GLM, generalized linear model, or also the spike response model that works using integral kernels rather than differential equations. And these kernels, they can be really fitted to the to correctly predict the spikes, the spike times, but also the membrane potentials of different cell types. So it's very flexible, this model, because it can be formulated more generally in terms of convolutions on some kernels that can have a very rich shape, so richer than just the exponential function. And yeah, so there has been these competitions in the past where researchers could submit their favorite neuron model, and the competition was to predict the spike times. So they could train their model on some training data set, and then they predicted spikes to some new test stimulus, and these generalized league integrated fire model, they performed actually quite well. And importantly,
this is for the case where you inject current into the soma, right? So
exactly,
it's,
yeah.
So that's so it's not really input into the whatever extended dendrite or something. So that's
no. It's that's an important remark. Yeah, it's really the response to current injection into the soma.
It was very nicely arranged competition. So I'm going to put a link to it in the on the homepage of this episode. Okay, so now you have you have 100 of these. We're able to turn it off. Okay, that's the sound of podcasts. It's a little bit of a disturbances, phones and stuff. So okay, so then say if you have 100 of these GIF neuron models, and then which are then maybe and then you want to describe you want to describe the dynamics of these 100 neurons with like a neural field model. That was sort of the challenge, the average population firing rate, or the population firing rate as a function of time to different input.
And not a neural field.
Mean field. I meant mean field. Yeah, sorry, neural mass.
That's an interesting research plan to be done. Actually, the neural field.
To go
so
to
also the spatial extension.
So I meant the mean field for a neural mass, right? I guess I meant the neural mass model. Extend and generalize the neural mass model. So what was the idea behind this? Of course, you have to throw things away. Your ground truth is sort of that you want to compare with is like microscopic simulations of these 100 GIF neurons that gets input, and then you want to sort of make a mean field model that best sort of are able to sort of predict the population firing rate for this population, right? For different kinds of input.
Yeah. So what is well known is the case of an infinitely large population of these GIF neurons. So this is described by a partial differential equation similar to the Fokker-Planck equation, but there are slight differences if there's not diffusive noise, but escape noise. So there you can formulate it in terms of integral equations. So you can find this in this neuronal dynamics book by Wolfram Gerstner, for example. And now the question that I worked on is how to generalize these known dynamics given by an integral equation to capture the finite size fluctuations, to get kind of stochastic version for that describe also the fluctuations of the population activity, and also in a non-stationary context. So not just like linear response in a steady state or so.
So what did you do?
Yeah, so maybe I would like to add one more thing. So there was in the generalized leaky intermittent fire, there is also adaptation that is not so easily attractable with the type of integral equation that work for renewal processes. So in the beginning of the podcast, we talked about non-renewal processes, and adaptation gives rise to a non-renewal process. But there has been a nice work by Richard Naud, who was a PhD student in Wolfram Gerstner's lab, who developed a so-called quasi-renewal theory that approximately describes, or can be used to approximately describe neurons with adaptation in a renewal fashion. And this now helped to develop also a finite size theory, because we could start with this renewal framework and really look how things change if you have only a finite number of neurons. And
that sounds like a lower hanging fruit, just dealing with one problem at a time, starting with just renewal processes and finite size. But you did both in some sense. You included this GIF models that has this adaptation thing that makes it this renewal approach.
Maybe actually it's already difficult for a model without adaptation. So for a renewal process,
there I believe you.
So like an integrated fire model without adaptation.
Ah.
So in this case, the neurons, they have already something is called relative refractoriness, because after each spike, the membrane potential gets reset in the integrate and fire model. After a reset, the membrane potential is far away from the threshold, so the probability to fire is very low, but it's not zero, because if the neuron was stimulated hard enough, one could still make it fire. This is in contrast to an absolute refractoriness where it is really forbidden to fire. And yeah, so the so what I did there, it was kind of really go back to really discretize the state space. So one can one can go to a state variable called the neuronal age, or the time since the last spike, that perfectly describes the current firing probability. And now for each bin, for each state, one knows this firing probability, and then one has to sum over all discrete states, and one basically sees the infinite size equations in this in this derivation, and then one can kind of expand around this infinite size limit. And but that's not so simple. So one really thought about this very long time. It's actually a hard problem, because the naive kind of naive tricks that one would do not work. So, for example, just taking the infinite size equations, get a population rate, draw a random number, and determine the fluctuations, that would not that would not give any reasonable results. So because then either one gets back to an inhomogeneous Poisson process. That has a Poisson process would then give a flat power spectrum, so no correlations. So that's not interesting. So the fluctuations have also a temporal structure. But then one could also basically in the population density equation, one could insert the fluctuations back to the reset, but this violates the conservation of the neural mass. So usually integrating over the population density should result in, should integrate to 1. So meaning that the number of neurons is always conserved. But if one does it naively, this in the finite size case, this conservation is of the number of neurons is broken, and then one has to see in the equation what are the good terms that can yield approximate conservation of the number of neurons. So this aspect of neural mass conservation has been very important in this derivation. So it's not in the end it's not an exact reduction that I get, but it's an approximation that works very well.
Yeah.
So
it's correct to just say that you sort of need to take into account some like the times since the distribution of times or to the last spike for the neurons. And if that gives you some kind of the information about the history, and then you add to that sort of the
Yes.
normal thing, the inputs. So somehow
Yes.
you're able to bring in key the sufficient amount of information about history from this, what you call the refractory density. I mean the density or the distribution of the times since the last spike for
Yes.
these neurons. Hmm.
Yeah. So this refractory density equation, this has been developed in some very nice papers by Shizhov and Graham. They are just they are basically equivalent to the integral equation, a description of neuronal populations. But this is nice in the sense that you can also describe Hodgkin-Huxley type models with this equation, which have several variables. So they, of course, are multidimensional models. But and then one would need to basically have a population density description in high dimension, which is very would be very expensive to simulate. But you can map everything to the all these these variables you can map to the time since the last spike. So knowing that the time elapsed since the last spike gives you a very good estimate of all those state variables, provided that there are no very slow variables like adaptation. This one has to treat separately. But all the gating variables in the Hodgkin-Huxley model, they can be they're basically determined by the time since the last spike. And then this becomes then a one-dimensional problem or one-dimensional state space. So in the space of time since the last spike, one just has a one-dimensional population density equation, and this is a very elegant approach developed by Shizhov and
So
Graham.
so as I remember, this is also covered in the book by Wolfram, is it? I think it is some
This
talk about.
refractory density equation, yes, yeah. So there is this duality between the integral equation
This
description and a partial differential equation or
as I
refractory
think
density.
the readers get here, it's sort of like quite like advanced mathematical modeling. But fortunately, there are good sources to learn about this for the people who
Yes.
want to dive into it. It's, I guess, one of the subfields of computational neuroscience where this with this kind of advanced modeling has not only been making a nice, well, advanced models, but actually very useful things. So I think
Yes.
that's okay. So, but at the end of the day, then, sort of, I mean, for the simple Wilson Cowan model, then you have essentially for neural mass, you have one differential equation per population.
Yes.
So what is the structure of your population, well, of your equations that describes the same population?
Yes. So we get an integral equation or a partial differential equation for each population. So
Okay.
that might sound a bit
Just an integral equation is something where something at the present depend maybe on the integral of what has happened before,
exactly
and the differential
exactly.
equation is more like the changes at present depend on the current state.
Yes,
But I
you
mean,
get
anyway,
a
yeah,
non-Markovian. We call it dynamics.
mm,
So one can express the current activity through an integral on the past activities, on the history of the stochastic population activity. And yes, so but I think even though this seems like very inefficient and complicated, it's I think an important step of going from spikes to rates. So once we have that these stochastic integral equations, we have a dynamics for the stochastic dynamics for the population activities of a finite sized population, and this I think is yeah, it's a good starting point for further reduction on the one hand, and on the other hand, it can actually in the integral equation form, it can be actually also it can be numerically solved quite efficiently. So one just needs to discretize the integral over the past into it becomes a sum, and it would basically, I would say, roughly correspond to 100 differential equations in practice, or maybe 200 differential equations.
okay,
So for one population.
yeah.
but it can be already
Yeah.
a little progress.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's, I mean, if you have a, because this GIF, this generalized integrated fire model, that has more than one equation per neuron, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you sort of just count, I don't know how many equations per neuron, a generalized integrated fire, like 2, 3, 4, I don't know.
Yeah, so it depends on the adaptation
Yeah.
variable. So if there's just um, if there's just a membrane potential and adaptation, one would have two, and if there are 2,000 neurons,
Yeah.
would be 4,000
Yeah. So,
equations.
yeah.
But of course, if there's only 50 neurons,
Uh,
then it
uh,
might be faster to simulate the 50 neurons
yeah.
than to simulate the integral
So
equation.
that's true. But how do you get because when they put the particular GIF population, a particular GIF model, then it will like all the, I don't know, 10, 15 parameters maybe of the GIF model, and then you want to convert it. Then it converts it into obviously you need. Well, you have to transfer that into parameters to be used in your mean field model. So how do you do that? Is that sort of, is there some kind of how,
That
or are the neural are the GIF parameters directly visible in the mean field model?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's no free parameter. So that's
Okay.
a good
Yeah.
benefit because it really links
Yeah.
now.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh, we call it the mesoscopic dynamics on to the microscopic parameters. So the neuronal parameters of the GIF model
Mhm.
and the parameters of this synaptic dynamics and so on. So it really is really a bottom-up approach that derives from a microscopic description these population equations, and the yeah, one directly sees the dependence on the microscopic parameter. So that's a big advantage of this population description
Yeah.
uh, compared to more heuristic neural mass models that are typically used, um, where there's no clear link to the underlying biophysical parameters.
Mm. So, but I mean, as you said, the equations themselves are deterministic. There's no stochastic, or are there any stochastic things in the final equations?
Uh, yes, so for
To run
finite
them through?
n, there we have exactly the stochasticity. So we get stochastic equations. In contrast to the previous population activities or population model that usually worked under the assumption of infinite number of neurons and were really deterministic. So the Fokker-Planck equation, for example, is a deterministic equation. Yeah, it's on this population level, it's deterministic. Or the refractory density equation for neurons with escape noise
Mm.
is is a deterministic equation. So I now developed stochastic versions that capture the finite size fluctuation. So there is a noise term in there.
Ah, I see. So there's not. It's interesting. Is it, why couldn't you do a deterministic one, or is it?
Of
Uh,
our so the deterministic one is a special case. So if we let in our equations n go to infinity, it
yeah.
converges to the deterministic
Ah,
equations.
interesting. Yeah, because it's not. Yeah, it's not clear to me why. Well, it's clear to me that finite n makes things much more complicated, but it's not quite clear why it should require stochastic, or maybe, well, because it's, I don't know. Maybe it's this is something I really haven't thought about. So that's
So,
that,
I mean, we want to we want to describe the population activity of let's say 1,000 neurons, and this is yeah, if you plot this or measure this, this will be a very noisy process.
That's true.
And we really describe a realization of this population activity by a stochastic process, by a stochastic
Yeah.
rate model.
Cool.
Yeah, so this
That means
gives
that you probably you should run it several times to if you're really interested in this in detail, and interested in results in detail.
yes. So the idea is that this stochastic rate model has the same statistics as the population activity generated by a microscopic network simulation. Yeah, so one could now run a microscopic model, compute this the stochastic population activity because it's a finite size network, and one could run a mesoscopic model, a stochastic population model. One also gets a realization of the population activity. Of course, the two realization will be completely different on the realization level, but the the realizations or the stochastic process itself, they would have the same statistical properties. So this process would correctly would give the same power spectrum of the population activity and yeah, the same statistics. So, for example, even the switching times in models for this perceptual bistability, they are accurately reproduced in the mesoscopic model compared to a detailed microscopic model.
So yeah, maybe you can just talk about this application. So that what's like this perceptual by stability. So then this thing that you can see, like the vase and the opposing faces,
Mhm.
that's and then you can switch between these perceptions. And this is, I guess, experimentally, this is maybe some kind of stochastic random process, or at least it's not deterministic when you switch, or it varies from time to time. And you, so this is something that your approach can capture.
Yes, so we compare, of course, with microscopic models that have been developed to describe this perceptual bistability. And now running such a bistable network, for example, one has two excitatory subnetworks coupled via an inhibitory population. So this gives winner take all competitive dynamics. So one sees clearly this switching in the population activity. So let's say excitatory population one will have a high firing rate and the other excitatory population will have a low firing rate, but there's the opposite configuration. And one sees switching. And this is because of a finite size effect. The fluctuations, they can help the system to jump between these two states. And this is, and of course, the, um, the rough, very rough picture would be that there is a kind of bistable potential where the system hops around and noise basically makes the jumping from one potential well in this bistable potential to the other. And but here in this with these equations we can really get a stochastic population model that where one can see the two attractor states, and then the noise is not put in ad hoc. So this has been actually done in previous models, that when one takes some bistable model, puts some additive noise in the equation, and then there you see some hopping, but then the noise is some free parameter, some ad hoc parameter. But in our system, it really comes out from the microscopic parameters. So the finite size fluctuations make the system jump, and Interestingly, the statistics is precisely described by this effective mesoscopic population dynamics as compared to the detailed microscopic simulation.
So what is then the how big are these populations, or what's the rough number that of the size of this population that you should have in order to get sort of like a plausible switch rate?
I think we took 400 neurons per
Okay.
population.
Yeah.
So
So this is because if you had increased to did maybe are you bold enough to say that this maybe reflects that this the populations behind the perceptual like bistability in neurons could be actually so small, and that is the effect, or
I'm not sure whether
well,
this is
you don't have
whether I would be so bold, but at least this. So it's kind of proof of principle that you can get this with spiking, with realistic spiking dynamics.
possibility, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's a possibility, and we get actually like switching times that are comparable with experiments. Like every 8 seconds or so, on average, we get a switching of our perception. And but of course, this simple model that we took looks like an oversimplification, and probably it's more difficult than just
Proof of principle.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Like one application, I think, I mean, a couple of podcasts ago, I talked to Hans Eckhard Presser about the Potjans-Diesmann model, which has been used came like 2014, but it's been used as like a test bed for many things, and including your mean field theory, right? So you tested your model on this Potjans-Diesmann model, I guess like 80,000 neurons, 8 populations of neurons, because it's like 2 populations in 4 layers, each of 4 layers, and a larger excitatory population and a smaller inhibitory population. And so then what happened when you tested it on the Potjans-Diesmann model?
Yeah, so the Potjans-Diesmann model is like an ideal test bed for this mesoscopic theory that we developed, because it's based on integrate and fire neurons already, and it has the structure of these interconnected homogeneous populations. So we could almost directly use this mesoscopic model and simulate this Potjans-Diesmann model on a mesoscopic scale. And yeah, so that worked out very nicely. So both the non-stationary dynamics in response to some transient input, and the fluctuations, and also the time-dependent fluctuation. So the time-dependent variance was actually reproduced, but also the power spectrum of this steady state activity, like the spontaneous activity of this network was well reproduced in terms of the power spectra of the different population activities of the different cell types. And with the important difference that this mesoscopic simulation ran, I think, about 120 times faster than the nest simulation of the point neurons,
Yeah.
the microscopic simulations.
And then for each population, how many? I guess this was not the GIF; it was the LIF. So maybe it was a little bit simpler, fewer equations, or how many equations?
No, actually, we made it more difficult.
Already.
So we added adaptation.
Oh,
So
so you
so
had
it's a little variation of the Potjans-Diesmann model that we used.
okay. Yeah.
And we used this escape noise instead of the external Poisson input that is usually used in the Potjans and Diesmann model, to model the background input. So, but then we basically adjusted these the parameters such that it gave similar results as the similar firing rates, steady state firing rates as the original microcircuit model. Then we run our microscopic simulation for the generalized intermittent fire model and compared with the mesoscopic simulation.
So, because I mean, these populations were, well, I mean, 80,000 neurons divided by 8 populations, that's on average 10,000, but of course there are always like much fewer inhibitory neurons. And so what difference did the finite n thing do in this particular case?
Good question. So maybe it's not the perfect use case, I would say, because the neuron number per populations are, as you said, on average, maybe 10,000. But there are some populations that have, I think, only a few thousand, and others that have more than 10,000. So we haven't tested this for let's say an end to infinity theory, but what should be true for sure is that you cannot you cannot get power spectra with an end to infinity limit. So just using the deterministic rate models or the end to infinity limit gives you deterministic dynamics. You may be able to get the firing rates right, but you cannot get you do not have fluctuations. So it doesn't make sense to compute a power spectrum for these.
Well, I guess you get the oscillations due to different populations driving each other, but you don't get the fluctuations inside the population. Maybe then,
you could, in a deterministic case, you can get oscillations, but you do not get the finite size fluctuations. Maybe they are for this specific model. Maybe they are not so crucial, I would say. But in general, this mesoscopic description, I think, is very important. If you think, for example, about heterogeneity, so there's different cell types, and even so there's not just one inhibitory neuron type. There's the different types of interneurons, and so one could start to further subdivide these populations so as to obtain small homogeneous populations. And then you really come into ranges where these fluctuations are important. But it's not just in numbers, I think, that tell us about how important are the fluctuations. So it could be that just for 100 neurons, you can well describe your phenomenon with a deterministic model. And also for 10,000 neurons, it might be that your deterministic model fails. So when are fluctuations important? we don't know a priori. So fluctuations and noise can have important effects in nonlinear systems. So I think one cannot fix this by just stating the number of neurons. But we haven't checked whether there are some really noise-induced phenomena in this Potjans-Diesmann model, where these fluctuations are really crucial, and without it, it would give some.
Seems like there's
Um,
many new interesting things to explore.
yes,
So, but I mean, uh, this I mean, we had some time ago had a episode with about the virtual brain and the whole brain models and this neural field models, and that was with Victor Jirsa. And there, you typically have this, I would say, like this neural mass models representing like a piece of cortex, like an area or a part of an area. So it's really a lot of hooked up neural mass models, and I think I don't remember exactly what they use in the virtual brain, but at least sort of they use this. Some of these old neural mass models are typically this low pass, like low dimensional, and have this like I think it's something called Janssen Rit model, for example.
yes,
Uh,
a lot of
so
neural mass
but
models.
how you were sort of alluding to this, maybe trying to use some of this in these neural field models. And what about replacing sort of like this some of these old style neural mass models with your population stuff? Would that be, of course, it would be much more time consuming. It require more computers, but I don't know how much what we are talking about in terms of it would make it completely impossible, or is that
Uh,
the way to go?
yes, exactly. So you could, in principle, replace these neural mass models by the stochastic integral equation.
Mm,
And as I said, it corresponds maybe to 200 ODE or stochastic ODEs.
mm,
But it would then be linked to biophysical parameters, would have
sure.
would support all the rich dynamics, transients,
Yeah,
and it gave us the speed up of
absolutely. Yeah,
100 or so.
yeah.
um, but one can also try now to simplify the stochastic integral equation to low dimensional dynamics. That
Mm,
will be basically ultra fast. So this one research that I'm currently doing is to systematically reduce these integral equation or partial differential equations to Wilson Cowan type equations or Janssen Rit type equations, but with the important difference that they are kind of systematically derived from an integrated fire model,
mm, yeah,
and that always keeps the link to the microscopic parameters.
yeah.
And
No, I think
then we
this
would
is
get
absolutely
really.
what we want, right? That's yeah.
Yes, and it would keep also the fluctuations. I think they are important, yeah, because there are a lot of we see these effects of metastability in the brain a lot. Say the up down states, or yeah, different different metastable effects where the system switches every few hundred milliseconds into another configuration. And it seems that many of these metastable dynamics is driven by actually finite size effects. And so I think we need neural mass models that capture these finite size effects. We need stochastic versions. And this framework that I'm building is to really population models on a mesoscopic scale that captures the fluctuations and is linked to underlying microscopic dynamics. And then using these mesoscopic population models to hook them up into larger areas, so
Mm,
cortical microcircuits, then areas, and then maybe up to the to whole brain. Yeah, maybe.
mm, yeah. No, I think this is certainly a very sensible program to try to implement, trying to systematically link these different like micro and macro via meso, and that is something which has been difficult to bridge these scales. So I think this is your work area is really important. I was thinking in terms of, if you look at sort of EEG measurements and also MEG measurements, I guess it's typically the most of what you see is sort of low frequency. I mean, you see up to, I don't know, a few tenths of hertz maybe, and so this sort of like the problem of capturing this rapidly changing stimuli thing is maybe not so important for, and maybe they don't show up in EEG, of course, but I mean it affects dynamics inside the brain. So maybe it will be, even if you don't see it in the measurements, you still, I guess, are affected
Yes,
by them, right? Yeah,
exactly. So
yeah,
so when especially this metastable dynamics on the mesoscopic scale is very sensitive to the noise and the noise properties and properties of the fluctuations. So this can give rise then to, let's say, low frequency dynamics. Yeah, for example, up and down
yeah.
states.
Mm.
Um, they give rise to yeah, correlations on longer time scales. Um, so to some slow dynamics, but the but but it's very important to correctly describe the temporal structure of the fluctuations. So also the short time scales to get these um, metastable dynamics right. So I could imagine that actually this the precise description on a short time scale has an effect also on the longer time scale.
Yeah, cool. So uh like the I mean, one general thing about these sort of like spiking networks is that they have like this different regimes, and I guess like the neural network has sort of like the paper from, we had a podcast on that also, where you can be in this asynchronous irregular state and synchronous irregular, these different states. And I guess that is also related to this thing of that in some states it's really the mean input to the population that matters, but in other states it's more the fluctuations. Right. And so is yours this, I guess, with the Pottians Diesmann, then you are in this, well, I'm not exactly sure where you are in this regime, but but
Yes.
where this is this applicable, your scheme applicable, has it been tested on both of these, in both these worlds?
Yes, so I think the Pottians Diesmann model is a rather low firing rate regime that is more like I would say more to the fluctuation driven regime. Uh, yes, I think so. It's there is so yeah, it's an interesting question because where we developed first this theory for so-called all-to-all connected networks
Hmm.
that like homogeneous all-to-all, and because the mathematics is simpler, but in this case one does not capture the fluctuations that are intrinsically generated in the network due to the randomness of the connectivity. So we call it the quenched randomness. And the noise is basically models or stochasticity models noise from the outside, and also the finite size noise, of course, because the global population activity fluctuations, they are seen by all neurons. But we have recently extended this theory uh, with a PhD student, Niels, to the case of sparse connectivity, where the network also generates substantial amount of intrinsic noise, and this can uh, this can be yeah. this can be also incorporated in our framework by so-called annealed approximation, where this random connectivity is in an approximate way is redrawn in each at each spike time. So basically the frozen or quenched randomness is turned into a dynamic noise that then can in turn be used in our mean field theory. And this works quite well. Yeah, so I think we can deal also with this fluctuation-driven regime.
So one thing that so you also extended this, I think, to well, I know you did, to inclusion also this spike timing dependent plasticity.
And now there's the short-term plasticity, like
short-term,
depression.
yeah, exactly. Sorry, short-term. I meant that. Short-term plasticity.
Yes.
So the Todix-Markram equation for the short-term plasticity. Yeah. Okay, so so what's the story there?
Yes, so we wanted to have a mean field description of that. So there has been already in a paper by Todix, Pawelczyk, and Markram. They have already had simple mean field theories for their short-term plasticity model. But we wanted to extend this to this mesoscopic stochastic case and also non-stationary case. So this is more difficult because on a microscopic level, we have this short-term plasticity dynamics on each synapse between neuron A and neuron B. And now we wanted a description that has only population activity. We describe everything by population activity A, population activity B, and the effective connectivity between A and B. And so we do not have single synapses anymore. We want to get an effective description of the effective mean field synapse between population A and B. And while at the microscopic level, the simulation works really with microscopic STP.
Sorry, influencing you in the wrong way.
Right. So so we thought about how we could describe the synaptic strengths or the dynamics of the effective synapse. Can come up with some mesoscopic dynamics for the synapse between between populations, knowing only the population activities, the stochastic population activities, and this also worked using coarse graining techniques quite well, I would say. So we did this for a simplified model of so-called Poisson neurons, where we neglect the refractory part. So we went a step back, made the model simpler, but then we could incorporate the short-term plasticity. But we made also simulations with refractoriness and used our results there, and it was the results were okay.
Yeah,
I would say.
Cool. Yeah, so that's the 2020 paper. I think the first author is Schmutz, and I'm going to add
right, Valentin Schmutz. Yeah.
And then I see that you're I think you're working on maybe also making a mesoscopic neural field model for the Allen mouse V1 model, or is it? I think I saw that on one of the slides you sent me.
Well, this is that is a plan for where this mesoscopic framework can be applied. Yeah, there is this very nice a model by Bile and
Yeah.
co-authors from the Allen Institute that is similar to the Potjans and Diesmann microcircuit model, but it has more neuron types. So there are 3 different types of interneurons. In total, I think there are 230,000 neurons in this model, and 17 populations. So it means that there are 4 different layers. Each layer contains 4 cell types, and
And of course,
then
these
there's
also
a
have this because these also have like I mean, it's like as spatially extended. It's more like a neural field model in some sense. It has space in it also because it covers the whole visual cortex. So I guess also that would so it be like a spatial component to it also, right?
yes. So there. So I think one can. So this model of the 230,000 neurons, I think, is just one cortical column, I would say, or I don't know, 1 square millimeter
Yeah.
of tissue. So there's no space there yet. But I think one probably I don't know exactly, but one can use several of them and connect
Yeah.
them in
Yeah.
space
So
to
you
to,
can
to cover
probably
a larger
yeah.
area of V1.
Yeah. So it's
And the nice thing about this model is that they built precisely on this GLIF model where our framework works. And so basically, it's a nice pipeline. So they have at the Allen Institute they have extracted the parameters for the different cell types, the GLIF parameters. And now one can readily use this mesoscopic framework and replace the, the different cell classes by a mesoscopic population and run this at the mesoscopic scale. Actually, it's quite nice. They also have a biophysically detailed implementation with morphologically detailed neuron models. Then they have this point neuron version based on GLIF models. And then there would be another level of granularity using this mesoscopic uh, model. So this is a thing that I have not done yet, but it's I think
sure.
obvious thing to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just when you say GLIF, it's really what I call GIF in the earlier part of the podcast, right? It's because
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, it's the same.
it's the same, yeah. So just so I will not avoid. No, I mean, and we had like Anton Akipov, who is sort of like the PI of that group who made that model. He was on the podcast episode number 10. So if you want to learn about, what the listeners want to learn about the model, then this is a place you can go. So, what about sort of because your ground truth when what you have been trying to mimic represent in your mean field model is the dynamics of point neurons, like well,
Yes.
GIF neurons. And what about like by I mean multi-compartmental neuron models and to go to make models for those? Is that or does it have to go via point neurons? You think first or?
Um, well, I mean, there is for 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 certain applications, for example, to uh, model the local field potential.
You need some kind
I
of
can. There's a nice theory by Gaute Einewo,
yeah, that's
a so-called hybrid model
yeah.
that basically simulates on the point neuron level and then feeds the spikes into morphologically reconstructed cell types that then produce electrical fields. So one can do that. Um, these very nice tricks, and then for so then there are some there's some also work done in the Blue Brain project by Eilif Müller and Rössert, I think, who basically replaced the dendritic filtering by some additional filters. So then one ends up again with a point neuron GLIF model, but where the input goes through this additional filtering steps. Of course, this would not capture probably nonlinear dendritic effects.
Okay.
So I haven't thought about the dendrites too much here, but to a certain extent, I think one can incorporate dendrites. What would not be difficult is to have just a two compartment model with a dendrite and the soma, and get just more variables for the neuron model.
What about what other things are you interested in? How are you extending this kind of work or going into other things? Or
yeah, so the main one of the main research projects at the moment is this is really the reduction of this mesoscopic model to a very efficient low dimensional model to get to get a model like the Wilson Cowan model that is as practical as the Wilson Cowan model, but has a link to the microscopic parameters and the fluctuations, and would allow the super fast simulations of large brain areas. The other interesting thing is to look at heterogeneity and go a little bit away from these homogeneous populations, because I mean there's nowadays this picture of the homogeneous populations maybe it's a bit old-fashioned. So people talk about neural manifolds and all this stuff, but I think this gives a nice picture of more generalized population activities, where the population activity is now not the uniform sum of all the spike trains, but a weighted sum of spike trains. And then I'm interested in whether one can still describe these networks, for example, low-rank networks that have some structure.
So what does low rank mean here?
Yeah, so far we have either uniform connectivity or a random connectivity, Error-Shreni type. So there's actually no structure in the network.
You can think of
this already difficult. Sorry?
Structure of it's like the structure of the connectivity matrix in some sense, right?
Yes. So the
properties.
So we would like to look at structured connectivity. There are various ways to have interesting structures. So the simplest thing is, of course, excitatory inhibitory. That there is Dale's law and other regularities. But then one has spatial structure. One can have some low rank structure, which means that that one can represent the connectivity as a sum of outer products. Basically, it's the rank of the connectivity matrix. And then the idea is that one can still use some mean field approaches in this case, because one could think that if there is a very detailed structure in the connectivity, a mean field description is impossible, because we need something to average over if you want to do mean field. But we know from other models, like I like the Hopfield model, for example, which is a very heterogeneous model if one looks at it at first glance. So
because the connectivity is like specified like
yes, so
memories.
there may be two neurons that have the same response properties to one pattern, but then when they retrieve another pattern, or if there's another pattern coming, they may have a completely different selectivity or response properties. So so it seems like a completely heterogeneous network. Still, we know from the mean field analysis that one can find other macroscopic variables that are not the overlaps. Sorry, not the population activity, but the overlap variables. Yeah, and then in these more generalized macroscopic variables, one can still get again low-dimensional dynamics. So we want to extend this to finite size, to take into account finite size fluctuations, and also take into account spiking dynamics with refractoriness, and basically look at this type of, let's say, Hopfield network or other low ranked networks. To see whether this one can still come up with a mesoscopic description of this. And also another interesting example in this case is the ring model that can form bumps. Right? These are classical models for working memory and also visual processing. And so typically these models are firing rate models. One can write down the equations also for spiking for spiking neuron models if n goes to infinity, but for finite size networks. So if on the ring, let's say there are only a finite number of neurons, we get fluctuations. Again, that can lead to a diffusion of the bump position. Yeah, the bump is a localized persistent activity in these ring models.
And represent like a head direction, maybe, or
exactly. So they code for some continuous variables, and one knows that if there's noise in the system, then this bump starts to move or diffuse. But how to do that for neurons with for spiking neurons and in the presence of finite size fluctuations, that's unclear. Also mathematically, that's interesting. How to do that actually? How to derive a continuum description, for example, a field model, because you can discretize your ring into sections of delta x. But then if you let delta x to 0, at some point there will be 1 or less than 1 neuron. And then also these finite size series are that they would break down at this for delta x, but maybe one can do it in a different way that that it still works. Yeah. And another interesting direction that we are currently working on is to do this finite size theory for the Fokker-Planck equation. So far, it has been only possible for neurons with escape noise. We have the refractory density equation. So this is one of the reasons why we actually use these GIF neurons with escape noise, because it allowed us to derive these finite size equations of these stochastic refractory density equations. But it's still an open problem how to do the same stuff for the Fokker-Planck equation. That means for an integrated fire neurons that are driven by white noise, Gaussian white noise. So if you have a finite number of those neurons, it's unclear how the mesoscopic equation would look like. So one gets basically one could imagine to get a stochastic Fokker-Planck equation. A Fokker-Planck equation that has some noise term.
Take that into account. Yeah.
But how to do this is unknown. Yeah, it's actually interesting. It's a similar, a simple question. Yeah.
So that
because
would mean
this Fokker-Planck equation has been used so much, but it's unclear how to do this for finite size.
so that means that it's like it's like the description of a population of neurons receiving this diffusive noise, right? Leaky
Yes,
fire models neurons
yes,
with leaky this short noise, this but small, like a bunch of small synaptic inputs in a sense, right? And
yes,
doing that for a finite population and make something like this
yeah.
Fokker-Planck equation, which works for infinite population, that's something you would like to work on also.
Yeah, actually, we worked on it. So there has been a very smart um, intern in our lab, Max, who tried this out. So actually, the extension to the Fokker-Planck equation is quite obvious if you come from this refractory density equation and this previous finite size theory. And so how to extend the Fokker-Planck equation. And yeah, we tried this out and it works really, really nicely. So we have no we have no derivation for this yet, but we know how to do it. I mean, what is the final outcome?
Okay, so yeah, like
And this would really enlarge the range of applicability. So if you not only have these escape noise neurons, but also the neurons that are driven by Poisson inputs. So this is a very yeah,
yeah,
very common case in computational neuroscience.
yeah,
So
that they use these models, yeah, exactly, with Poisson. Poisson noise in all incoming Poisson inputs. So, but how can a group starting using your methods? Are there programs and well documented programs available that people can download, or
so there is code on GitHub for these mesoscopic population dynamics based on the integral equation. There, there is actually an updated version now that implements this stochastic integral equation in different programming languages. So there's an implementation in Nest. Actually, there's actually an implementation in Nest that can be used, like a module that
okay,
or a model that is implemented. Then on GitHub there is a custom C code and there's a Python code, a Julia code, and yeah. So one can also compare these different implementations regarding simulation speed and
so,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's on this level. It's not. It's I would say it's still on this level. I would like to integrate this more into standard platforms.
Yeah. Cool. So finally, like this is like a typical final question I have, sort of relating to AI, because one thing that you have shown, I think, are really highlighting the role of, for example, finite size fluctuations in making an unfrozen brain, meaning that it can switch from like perceptions, for example, and is this because the AI today, at least the standard AI, is deterministic and doesn't really have noise in it, and is there some like take home messages to use for the or something that the AI community can learn from your work?
Well, yeah, it's a difficult question. So the so the models in AI they are more firing rate models. They have a lot of differences to the neuron models in biology. So there are no spikes. Time is not continuous, and yeah, many others. So, and I think it's unclear what is the. I think it's an open question. What, why the brain computes with spikes, for example, and
Mm.
why this could be advantages. Um, so, but in principle, one could try to rebuild some of the functional neural networks, like recurrent neural networks, that can be trained to perform some task. One could replace the nodes with a spiking neuron population, like a population of integrated fire, and and then train this. Yeah, then take our theory to map this to stochastic rate units, the spiking populations, and then one ends up with a stochastic recurrent neural network with stochastic firing rate units that one knows how to train it by standard methods, force or some other backpropagation methods to perform some task, and then one could go back to the spiking neuron implementation because we have this mapping from spiking neuron to rate. And then one would have a spiking neuron implementation that performs a certain task. So one can do the training and of the learning of the weights one could do on this mesoscopic population level, then go back to spiking. Why this could be useful, I don't know, but I think there are a lot of efforts to to implement these neural networks with spiking neurons, and this could be one way to go.
Yeah, to train them.
Yeah, but I don't know what exactly why this what would be the benefit at this point. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think this has been very nice. I learned a lot from something. This is one of the things when I started doing neuroscience, computational neuroscience, and of course, when you come from a physics background, you think about mean field, or at least this sort of like bridging scales from micro to macro, which has been done so successfully in statistical physics. And then whenever I ask people about this, how these mean field theories that were available at the time, this was in the 90s, how they were derived, and I never got a very good answer. It seems like they were very much heuristic, and it was like for me, it was a little bit unsatisfactory. But so I think your work here has really been important. So thanks for that. So are there any things we haven't covered that you would like to bring in as the final?
No, I think it's okay. I think yeah, I don't have further things that come to my mind at the moment.
Sure,
Probably there
no
are.
problem as well. Thanks a lot, Tilo. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it has been a pleasure. Thank you very much.